Welcome students. Students, in the previous class, we were discussing how the revolutionary government made different laws for the benefit of the women, like opening of state school, making divorces legal. So all sort of things were changed during the 17th century. Like that, today we are going to discuss about one of the major changes took place during that period of time, that is the abolition of slavery. Students, one of the most important revolutionary social reforms of the Jacobin regime was the abolition of slavery in the French colonies. Students, during that period of time, slavery system was going on. And during that period of time, the revolutionary government took steps to abolish the slavery system in the French colonies. The colonies in the Caribbean, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Saint Domingo were important suppliers of commodities. During that period of time, these Caribbean colonies were the important suppliers of tobacco, indigo, sugar and coffee. So it was most important for the Europeans. But what was the problem then? The problem was that it was very difficult for the Caribbean countries to make supplies of these commodities. Why? Because the Europeans, they were reluctant to go and work in distance and on familiar land. That to understand. What is the problem? The problem was that the Europeans, they were reluctant. It means not interested at all to go and work in distant places as well as on familiar land. What is the problem? If workers will not be there, then there will be less production because there will be shortage of labor in the plantations. So how could this problem be solved? So this problem was solved by the triangular slave trade between Europe, Africa and the Americas. So that this problem could be set out, they made a plan. What are the plan? This problem made through slave trade. How it was made? The French merchants sailed from the port of Bordeaux at Nantes to the African coast. There, they bought slaves from the local chieftains. The local chieftains of that areas, they had already brought slaves from the local areas. And these merchants, they reached there and bought slaves from the local chieftains. After that, these slaves were branded and shackled and packed tightly into the ships. Whenever we are packing some goods and throwing to the different vehicles to transport from one place to another place, like these slaves were branded and shackled. Thereafter, they were packed tightly into ships and it was taking 3 months period to reach the Caribbean colonies through the Atlantic Ocean. And after that, they were sold to the plantation owners. You see, the Europeans, they were reluctant to work. Result of that, this problem was solved through slave trade. And after bringing these slaves from the African coast, they were sold to the plantation owners. You see, this is the image how the slaves were shackled and kept inside the ship. You see, this is another image how they were kept inside the ship and brought to the French colonies, where they were sold to the local plantations owner. What they were doing now? These plantation owners, they bought from the French merchants and they started exploiting them. The exploitation of the slave labor made it possible to meet the growing demand in the European markets. There was more demands of tobacco, indigo, sugar in the European markets. As a result of this, the plantation owners, by bringing them from the French merchants, buying them from the French merchants, they used them in the plantation work. As a result of this, the production will grow, so that they can supply to the European countries. As a result of this, the demands of the Europeans could be met, such like sugar, coffee and indigo. This is the one thing, how the plantation owners are getting benefits. At the same time, the port city like Bordeaux, Nantes also started developing, because these were the important port cities for slave trade. So these port cities also developed slowly and slowly. You see how this image shows how the slaves were being tortured by the plantation owners, and they made to work in the plantation work. They were shackled and also made to do work in the plantation. You see, particularly this picture, here it shows how the slaves working as a labor, that is called slave labor, because one of the benefit of the plantation owner is that once they will purchase these slaves, buy the slaves from the French merchants, there is no need of paying any remuneration or wages to them. So that throughout the day, 24/7, they will work for their master. This is the benefit of the plantation owners, what they were getting by purchasing or buying slaves from the French merchants. And you see, this picture shows how the French plantation owners, they made them work in the plantation work. They are working in the sugarcane field. And in this way, the plantation owners were exploiting the slaves. You see, at another picture, image, which shows how the slaves were made to work in the plantation works, so that they could supply or they could meet the demands of the European markets. This was the benefit for the plantation owners. And though this was going on in French colonies during that period of time, no one was there to raise voice against this practice, because it is an exploitation of the slaves. Throughout the 18th century, there was no criticism of the slavery in France. No one was there criticizing the prevailing system of slavery. But later on, the National Assembly also held long debates about the rights of the men, which should be extended to the French colonies. Though discussions were made during that time in the National Assemblies, still it was not able to pass any laws. Students, National Assembly was the legislative body. It could make law. Then what is the point that the National Assembly unable to pass any law regarding the exploitation of the slaves' labor? The reason is that the member of the National Assembly, they were the rich and prosperous section of the society. Because, and these people, most of them were the plantation owners, and they were the businessmen, and whose income were totally dependent on slave trade. So if they will raise their voice against the slavery system, and if they will pass law in the National Assembly, then it will affect their business. How could they pass this law against their own interest? That is why the National Assembly was unable to pass any law regarding the abolition of slavery system in France, only because of fearing opposition from the businessmen whose income was dependent on the slave trade. However, finally, the convention passed the law to free all slaves in the French overseas possession. But though the convention passed this law, it was turned into be a short-term measure. Why? Why it was turned into be a short-term measure? Because after 10 years, again it was reintroduced by Napoleon Bonaparte. In this way, it continued for some period of time. At last, it was abolished in the year 1848. The slavery system was abolished from the French colonies in the year 1848. In this way, France abolishes slavery system. Students, though some changes were made during the revolutionary government, still there were lot to be done, more to be done by the revolutionary government that could change the life of the people in French society. And now we are going to discuss how the revolution changes the everyday life of the people. The revolution of 1789 brought many changes in the life of the men, women, and children. Already we have seen how the less prosperous section of the society got benefit during the time of Robespierre, how women could enter into the education, got job training, that change also we have seen. Now, one more important law that came into effect soon after the storming of the Bastille in the summer of 1789 was the abolition of censorship. After the summer of 1789, when the Bastille fort was stormed, after that another important law was passed, that is abolition of censorship. What is that censorship? In the old regime, all written material and cultural activities, written materials like books, newspaper, cultural activities like plays, could be published or performed only after they had been approved by the censor of the king. It means there was imposition on the people that anything which will go against the domination, against the king, it will not be allowed. That is what the censorship is. During that period, every materials, written materials, cultural activities could only be performed once they had been approved by the censor of the king. But now, the Constitution of 1791 begins with the Declaration of Rights. With the Declaration of the Rights, people got the freedom of speech and expression as the natural and inalienable rights. Already we have discussed, students. So now this Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen provided freedom of speech and expression to the people of France. You see how the people were fighting for their justice. This picture shows like that. Now, newspaper, pamphlets, books, and printed pictures flooded in the towns of France. Earlier, everything has to be permitted by the king. Once they will get permission, then and there it will be in the market. But now, as the people have got the freedom of speech and expression with the Declaration of Rights, now newspaper, pamphlets, books, and printed pictures flooded in the market of France. And thereafter, from this market of France, it is spreaded to the different part of the countryside. Countryside means what? To the village area. Because all these books were available in the town first. Then it is traveled to different part of the countryside. What will happen? Now the people, those who were there in the village area also, they could get about the different books, different newspapers, and other printed pictures. And what was there in that newspaper? What was there in that pamphlets? What was there in the books? That was the books, pamphlets, newspaper, all sort of things which were published during that period of time, full of the description and discussion of different events and changes taking place in France during that period of time. All those newspapers, pamphlets, books, and many printed pictures, that these papers, these books, these pamphlets were full of description of those events which were taking place during that period of time in France. Now what will happen? Slowly and slowly, people also came to know what was happening there in the cities of France. At the same time, the people also got the ideas about the different events taking place in France. So in this way, the life of the people gets changed. Freedom of press also meant that opposing views of events could be expressed. Now before the people were not able to express their views because there was the censorship of kings. Now it is abolished. So that now the people are able to express their views because they have got the freedom of speech and expression. And freedom of press is a part of the freedom of speech and expression. Plays, songs, festive procession attracted large number of people. Plays, those were staged in different parts of the cities of France, were to make conscious the people about their rights. Songs were sung during that time to raise their voice against the existing practices which are inhumanitarian, so that could be educated. The image shows how the people were raising their voice against the domination by getting the ideas from the newspaper, books, pamphlets, or different plays shown during the time, staged during the time. Students, now we have come to the conclusion part of this chapter, French Revolution. In 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself as the Emperor of France. He was an ambitious ruler. He was having higher expectation. For this, he set out to conquer neighboring European countries, disposing dynasties and creating kingdoms where he placed his own members of his family. He set out and conquered different parts of European countries. And thereafter, after conquering those parts, he placed his own family member there to rule those parts which were conquered by Napoleon Bonaparte. In this way, he conquered vast areas of European countries. You see, the image of Napoleon Bonaparte, when he was set out to conquer different part of the European countries, he was only having one thing in his mind: to expand his territories. He introduced many laws such as the protection of private property and a uniform system of weights and measure provided by the decimal system. At the same time, Napoleon Bonaparte was a great liberator. During his period of time, he introduced many laws, such as the protection of private property, which was not there earlier. At the same time, the uniform system of weight and measure also introduced by Napoleon Bonaparte, which is consist of the decimal system. So that, looking into the laws made by the great Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, initially many people saw he was a great liberator who would bring freedom for the people. But all those hopes which were there in the mind of the people dismantled at a certain time. Very soon, the Napoleonic armies came to be viewed everywhere as an invading forces. The reputation was Napoleon Bonaparte has got in the beginning as a great liberator suddenly disappeared from the mind of the people. His armies came to be known as an invading force because he was always in a mood to conquer a different part of the European countries and wanted to expand his territories. You see, the image shows how Napoleonic armies coming across the different cities of the countries. But though he was a great liberator, great ruler, still he was defeated at the battlefield of Waterloo in the year 1815. With this, the age of Napoleon Bonaparte came to an end. But though the rule of Napoleon Bonaparte came to an end, still the measures which were carried out during the time of Napoleon Bonaparte continued for a long period of time and having a great impact on the people for a long period of time also. So students, we have discussed from the very beginning how the existence of the French society changes from the period of Louis XVI to the period of Napoleon Bonaparte. You see, this is the Battle of Waterloo, where Napoleon Bonaparte was defeated. So, with this, the ideas of liberty and the democratic rights, which were the most important legacy of the French Revolution, continued to be a source of inspiration for the different countries of the world in the 19th century. Students, we have discussed already earlier also that French Revolution has given three things to the world. What are those? Equality, liberty, and fraternity. And the legacy of the French Revolution, which were there during that period of time, itself is a source of inspiration in the present era also. You know, during the Indian freedom struggle also, the legacy of French Revolution is a great source of inspiration for the people of India. Many colonies who were there raising voice against their existing government, existing ruler, they got the idea from the French Revolution. And they moved towards the creation of a sovereign nation states. That was possible only because of this ideology of French Revolution. In India also, Tipu Sultan, the great social reformer, Raja Ram Mohan Rai, who always responded to the ideas coming from the Revolution of France. So, it continued to be a source of inspiration today also, and it will continue for the next generation also. So, students, today we have completed the whole chapter of French Revolution. Now, I'll ask some questions about the portion what we have discussed today. The first question is, when did slavery system abolish in French colonies? When did slavery system abolish in French colonies? The answer is, slavery system abolished from French colonies in 1848. In the year 1848. The next question is, when did Napoleon crown himself as the Emperor of France? When did Napoleon crown himself as the Emperor of France? The answer of this question is, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself as the Emperor of France in the year 1804. In the year 1804. The next question is, name the battle where Napoleon Bonaparte was defeated. The answer to the question is, Napoleon Bonaparte was defeated in the Battle of Waterloo in the year 1815. So, students, with these questions, we have completed the chapter French Revolution.